Test, test, 1, 2, test, test, 1, 2. Okay, how'd that get messed up? Hold on. Okay, I think that actually fixed it. Uh, so, long story short, um, I am running behind today because of technical issues and because there's a storm going on outside. On top of that, I'm going to have to end this around 11:30 because I have to get up early tomorrow. Lest the storm is still going on, in which point I'll have to get up even earlier tomorrow. Anyways, I went on a small writing binge over the weekend because I had a bunch of free time and just felt the itch. So, yeah, we're now a chapter ahead of this and did a bunch of other things, and I really just didn't want to do the editing thing today, so we're just doing something fun for me because I'm not going to have a ton of time. So we're going to be doing chapter 5 of A Hero of Time. Sorry, was reading a message from a friend. You can tell I'm flustered today. I'm all over the place. There we go. That's better. But yeah, so we'll just be working on this one today. Just so I can get a start on it, because it's the last one I worked on. It was the mindset I was in earlier. And I've just been having the itch to write this one. Water bottle, sorry. And snoring Rusty. As always, there will always be a snoring Rusty. Aizawa groaned. He had tried to wave off the security bots that had shown up after the sonic boom the supposedly quirkless boy had accidentally created from the ball toss. And as soon as he got his hearing back, he even called Nezu to inform him directly that everything was, in fact, okay. Sorry, just stupid thing is lagging. I'm trying to check the events from the apprehension test. So much so, he had to rush to get his students to start the 50-meter dash. So much so that he'd even forgotten to threaten the class with the risk of expulsion if they didn't show they had the potential to be here. Ah, darn it. Well, my fidget toy just fell off my table. Give me a second. Oh, there goes a bullet. So I guess you're not Uh, Somewhat. Mostly for my original stories. This is not an original story. It's just a more fun project. If my headset would stop falling off. There's the plastic thing. For instance, my protagonist for my story. Do you play word games like Word or Connection? Not really. Some of my characters have pretty good naming conventions. For instance, Nylia is actually an Irish word. For means, it's actually got two different name meanings. I believe in Irish it means strong little one. In Russian, however, it means a dirty mixing, which plays off the fact that the character's a mixed breed. So much so that she doesn't technically fall into any defined race within her world. Though the word in Russian tends to lean towards alcohol, as in a bad mixing batch. Still drinkable, but it's not going to turn out good. Which I actually liked. Austin, my character for from The Last Guardian, in not Latin, but it's a root derivative Latin, Greek. I think it's Greek. I don't have the notes for that one available, so I'd probably need to double check this all later. But it can mean a striding titan. Which plays into a lot of his lore later on. Haven't gotten that far in his story yet, though. Sophia has obvious Old English, and I think it's Anglo-Saxon references, including fairy tale references. Yes, I used the name of a fairy for the girl with a pet moth, so sue me. But yeah. Back to the actual story I'm working on. though with such a powerful showing by someone who, even as he tried to explain the next event, was still claiming he did not have any form of quirk or superpower, seemed to be motivation enough to get the students to give it their all. Though he wouldn't let them off that easy. If he thought they were slacking even a little bit, he'd remind them that their position here was never guaranteed. At least for the first few weeks. Well, it was rare for him to expel students after the first few months. He'd done it before. Though usually only if their behavior was particularly unredeemable. Or they showed no sign of improvement whatsoever. Still, he could already feel a growing migraine as the 50-meter dash began. Most went about as he expected. After all, one of the kids was the younger brother of a former classmate of his, and had no doubt inherited the family's super speed quirk. A few were surprising, like the invisible girl who was surprisingly spry and fast, despite having no sign of any form of enhancement from her ability. everything went according to plan until it was time for the green-haired, supposedly quirkless boy to take his turn. He wanted to try his erasure quirk on him, but he wasn't willing to risk hitting the other student and tripping them up mid-run. So he simply watched and gawked when Izuku got a 1.3 seconds. As soon as the firing pistol flickered, fired, the boy simply flickered before appearing on the other end of the field. He was likely faster, but the machine simply didn't realize he had crossed the line until it had relocated him on the other side. It had and registered that as his allotted time. Levitation, some sort of force manipulation, teleportation. Whatever the hell that knife was. Just how many weird abilities did this kid have? The lack of quirk was somehow becoming more and less believable as the lesson went on. Sorry, I'm reading up the events of the next test. Why is this stupid thing giving me the results, but not the actual... The grip strength test wasn't as much of a shock. The boy had tried to do it without any tricks to start with, but had ended up fusing with his weird dagger. To get a strength boost. Enough to reach one of the higher scores in the class. Not top, but close. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Hold on. It's really coming down out there. Jeez. The standing long jump was a bit like the 50-meter dash. Only instead of pulling an upset by teleporting, boy simply took a step up off the ground and walked to the opposite side of the field, over the sand pit. The sand pit was longer than even what would have been seen in the Olympics. So clearing it was no easy feat without some form of flight or super strength. The fact the boy could simply just walk across without touching the ground was all the more baffling. Mostly because the boy could levitate. He had expected to see him simply float. Only made more confusing as he saw a more advanced version of what he assumed was the same ability as the boy sat as if at a school desk with a notebook in front of him. As he scribbled away on what should have been empty air, but instead acted like a flat surface. All the made all the more surreal by the fact that he was upside down, floating just above his other classmates' heads. A few eagerly bombarding him questions that he was giving half or nonsensical answers to, as he lazily scribbled away in that notebook of his. Where had that even come from? He was almost sure the boy didn't have it when he came to the field. Then again, the boy could teleport, so it was likely he could have retrieved it from the classroom easy enough. That didn't change the mild annoyance headache forming behind Aizawa's eyes. Partly from his annoyance at this new problem child who seemed to relish in showing off his abilities. And partly because his quirk seemed to have no effect on said abilities. Even so, he somewhat knew he was probably showing off because he likely couldn't show off before. He didn't know what or how this ability worked. But if he truly was quirkless, he wouldn't have had the ability to show off or play with his abilities with his classmates. Like the other kids he'd likely grown up with. Logically, Aizawa knew he should give the kid some leeway. But with how problematic the kid was already proving, well, he was having a hard time keeping that in mind. Though he wondered how much of that was his own growing annoyance and how much of that was the fact that he had to keep reminding himself that despite this kid being as old as his usual students, he'd likely never got the chance to do these very actions that most would take advantage of in their younger years. It didn't help that he didn't particularly like people who relied too heavily or showed off their flashy quirks to begin with. Don't know if you heard that, but that was quite a thunderous boom. Don't know quite how close that was. Even if he had to keep reminding himself that This was not that. Funnily enough, the kid didn't seem to have a good answer for the repeated sidestepping, and had to do that one normally. Though, for a normal try, that was the same for almost the entire class. Only 2 or 3 students actually had a power that would be helpful in this situation. A small boy he'd be asking Nezu to double check his background because he wasn't sure how he got into this class. A kid with extendable arms. Who had basically held himself up by his arms and moved his entire body, back and forth super quickly. And a boy with an explosion power that simply blasted himself back and forth as fast as he could. Though, despite not having a good answer for the side steps, he still was one of the highest non-enhanced scorers. Coming in behind Tensei's little brother, who had the highest score for the non-quirk. Oops, done that, sorry. Next was the ball throw. The very test that caused so much trouble earlier. He could only hope there wouldn't be a repeat, only there were several. Between the zero gravity girl levitating her ball out of the atmosphere, which took way too much time, so he had the entire class continue theirs while they were waiting on hers because they were already behind. To another girl deciding to make an entire field artillery gun to fire her ball. Tripping yet another alarm. Thankfully, this one only lasted for a few seconds, as after the first one, Power Loader was keeping a closer eye on the alarm board. If this kept up, next year he'd likely have to load the students onto buses and take them to an actual quirk training area instead of using the physical evaluation field they used for the Gen Ed students. Non-hero course students. Wow, that was a loud boom. I seriously doubt my mic is picking them up, but the thunder is getting dramatic. Alright, with that said, I'm going to take a quick bio break. I will be right back. Um, and if the stream cuts off while I'm gone, just know I lost power or something. I am back. Give me a moment. I'll get started. I'm trying to get everything back into place. Which would just be a pain because the nearest one was nearly a mile into the campus. Probably for a good reason, though. With how hectic his students were being this year. Besides those two hiccups, though, the rest of that test went mostly according to plan. The toe touch was even worse than the side to side steps, with only the guy who could duplicate his arms having an actual advantage here. The distance run was another odd one. While the boy didn't seem to have any power-based advantage, he did, however, have a pair of motorized roller skates that allowed him to keep up with the creation girl. Sorry, my roommate came to come check on the storm, and we had to talk for a few minutes, so. Yeah. Anyways, back to the story. Who had a similar idea? Creating a small electric bicycle. That she would swap between pedaling to recharge its battery and resting while the electric battery covered extra distance for her. The two went on and on and on. Aizawa wasn't sure what type of battery was powering those skates, or how they could keep up with a bicycle but as they were already behind schedule and they were coming up at the end of the day, and he just wanted to be done with it, he called it at the half-hour mark. Before pulling up the class's score. He had such a tired headache that he didn't even have the patience to try and put on a show to scare them. Since this test got further out of hand than it usually does, I'm going to have to go talk to Nezu now that we're finished. Since that's the case, I'm just going to go ahead and show you your scores as a group. To save time. While this test won't count against your grades, it's just to understand where you are and what we have to work with. I'd keep in mind that it's very likely future tests may very well be used to assess whether or not you stay or progress in the hero course. So I expect you to work hard on improving. As if you fall too far behind your peers, you may very well find yourself losing your seat in my class. Aizawa said as he glanced around, seeing the worried expressions of many of the students. Though he'd have to admit to himself he was mildly annoyed by the lack of concern by the green-haired boy who had been a headache throughout the day. He might actually need to read his file. He normally tried to wait a few months before reading his students' files. Sorry, I keep getting distracted by the weather outside. It's really coming down out there. Like, no joke. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but it is rattling the windows. But this one was making him reconsider that. Or at the very least, considering an exception. For this one, he thought as he hit the button on his remote. A hologram projecting the various scores. And unsurprisingly, huh, Aizawa thought as he pushed the button to display the various scores. And there was no surprise that the green-haired boy was at the top of the list. Even if he did not come in first in every assignment. He came in the top bracket of almost every assignment. And was an absolute headache for it. Aizawa wanted nothing more than to curl up in his sleeping bag his sleep for the next few hours until he had to go on patrol. But even as he told the kids to go back to the classroom and review the syllabus, he winced at the end of day bell and the dozen or so notifications on his phone from Nezu. That made it very clear that he was not to sneak off and find a quiet place to rest before his next patrol. The rat was never short-winded with one-on-one conversations, let alone ones that involved scolding. While the rat had received a lot, in fact was still receiving therapy for the events of what happened in his time before he was rescued from the laboratory the Hero Association had found him in. Some part of him still took joy in punishing humans. Even if it was just mildly inconveniencing and annoying them. The rat was a sadist. He'd seen what he'd done to and there was no doubt in his mind that the rat was in fact some form of a sadist. Especially with how brutally he took down villains when he actually, and rarely, directly joined the fray instead of playing the commander in the chair role, as was his usual modus operandi. My headset's dying and the storm is getting worse. So I think I will call it there for tonight. Sorry if this wasn't the best stream, but it's the best I can put together. And I really do need to get to bed because I have to get up early tomorrow. So until next time, this is Wrecker, signing off.